Hello everyone, George here. Today I'm going to walk you through a basic edit. This is the way that I would edit 90% of the photos that I take. It's very quick, it's very easy. A lot of people think I do a lot more editing on my photos than I actually do, and I think you'll see that once we get started. So first I want to tell you a little bit about this photo. This is a friend of my father-in-law's named Robert. He's a local farmer. When I went out to do photos, I just wanted to get some pictures of a farmer in their environment doing farmery type things. When I got there, I saw this amazing little workshop that he had, and I knew I wanted to at least do a couple of photos in there. So when I walked in, you can see this big window here on the upper left. This was letting in light, and the light that it was letting in was amazing. I wanted to try to use that light, the available light, to me to take the picture. So I got in there, I did a couple test shots, but the light just wasn't quite bright enough. I was having to shoot at ISO 800, at 2.8, and at a 60th of a second, and it was still pretty dark, and I really didn't want to go above ISO 800, and I wasn't quite happy shooting at 2.8 because I wanted a really good depth of field. I wanted everything to be in focus. So what I did is I set a light up outside here, outside this window you see in the upper left, through a giant softbox. Not giant, it's probably about 60 centimeters. And position it in the same direction that the light was coming from. So all I did was mimic the available light that I had and just made it a little bit brighter. And then this allowed me to shoot at ISO 200, 6.4, and a 60th of a second to try to get as much ambient light as I could in the photo still. It was still a little bit dark. I've adjusted the raw a little bit, so I've reduced the highlights a little bit. I've increased the exposure by 1.15, and I've brought up the shadows and the blacks a little bit. And that's going to be our starting point. I like to try to start with a reasonably flat photo in terms of contrast. This is about as flat as I'm going to be able to get this photo to start with because the ratio between the light and then the dark was pretty significant. So this is about as flat as I'm going to get. So let's get started. Now, all the editing that I do is non-destructive, and I like to make it as non-destructive as often as I possibly can because this will allow me to go back and make changes to things that I couldn't do if I had done it in a destructive way. So that means I do things on lots of new layers, on lots of individual layers. I never, ever use the eraser tool. I'll use masks. I try to make it as non-destructive as possible so that I can go back and make changes. The first thing we're going to do is straighten this photo up. You can see it's a bit crooked. If you hit V on your keyboard and then just click and drag from either side, you'll pull down a guide. And if we pop the guide here, you can see shelf is touching here, shelf is not touching here. I mean, you could see that it wasn't crooked without doing that, but if you're ever not sure, that's a good way to check. What we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this layer, and you can do that by just hitting Command J or Control J on a PC. That brings up a new layer. We're going to go to Filter Lens Correction. Now, I haven't updated my CC to 2016 or 2017, whatever is the latest one. I'm still on 2015. I just haven't updated because I like to wait a while for them to work out bugs. But since I'm on 2015, my camera and lens are not actually in here. I'm using the XT2, and I have the XT1 in here. But regardless of that, I generally don't use the camera and lens automatic corrections. I'll usually go into the custom because all I really want to do on here is straighten this out. And looking at the guides and knowing how often I straighten things up, I'm going to take a stab that this is around 0.8. Maybe 0.85. Yeah, and now that's looking pretty straight. We can also look at these. So this one's straight, this is straight, that's mostly straight, that one's straight. So this one's not straight, but these two are probably down to building of the shed because This looks pretty straight. This one's reasonably straight. All this stuff is pretty good. This one's perfectly straight. All in all, I'm happy with the photo. It's pretty straight. So we're just going to hit OK. And now we're going to get started on the actual editing. So like I said, I don't do much. I think the main thing that gives my photos the look that they have is how I add contrast. And I do it with one step. And that one step then sort of has three options. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a hue and saturation layer. We're going to end up moving this saturation slider down, but I'm not going to yet because I'm going to show you why. But what we're going to do is change the blending mode to one of three different blending modes. It's either going to go to multiply, overlay, or soft light. And those will depend on the photo that I'm editing. I can tell looking at this photo already that I'm more than likely not going to use multiply. I'll show you what it looks like. Multiply will make it very dark. What I generally do if I use multiply is I will then grab a brush on a 5% opacity and start masking things back in. It works really well on environmental portraits that are outdoors, especially with the sky. It will add drama and mood to your sky pretty much instantly, and then you can mask your subject back into the photo a little bit. This photo, however, is too dark to do that. I want these canisters and all these tools and things like that to be a big part of the photo. So multiply is not going to work. So the other option is overlay, which is basically soft light on steroids. Overlay, you can see it's just too much. It's very contrasty. It's just too much. But you can also see all of our reds are way oversaturated now. That's why we need to drag this down. You could go all the way down. I tend to go somewhere in this -50 range. And that's looking good, but overlay is just too much. So soft light, much better. Much, much, much better. It's giving us a good starting point because I'm going to do a couple of things after this that are going to increase the shadows a little bit or lighten the shadows a little bit and possibly bring the highlights down. But I think that's looking pretty good. I'm going to reduce the opacity of this down to about 75%, and you can see the difference that it's done so far. But the shadows now are too dark. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to channels. You're going to command or control click on the red channel, and your red channel is going to consist mostly of all your highlights. So by control clicking on that, we've got a selection made of the red channel. We're going to go back to layers, create a levels layer, and then you can see that we've got a mask on it. And what that mask is currently is it's anything we do right now is going to affect the highlights. So I'm going to invert that, and you do that by making sure your mask is highlighted and then hitting Command I. Now we've got a mask that is only going to affect the shadows, and you can see our histogram drastically change. Let me show you that again. You can see this is when it's affecting the highlights, and then now we've inverted it so it's going to affect the shadows. And you can see this gap here. What we're going to do is we're going to change the blending mode to luminosity so that any changes we do here aren't going to affect the color. They're only going to affect the luminosity of the photo. And you could, in theory, just drag this to where that gap ends. I think that's probably too much. I'm probably going to go somewhere, let's see, that's what we started. Drag, 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 right about, let's see, here, I think. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Maybe just a little bit more. Yeah, there you go. That looks pretty good. So that's just brightened up the shadows a little bit. Now we need to do the same thing for the highlights. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go over to channels. We're going to command click the red channel. We're going to go to layers. We're going to create a levels layer. And this time we've got a mask that is only going to affect the highlights. And you can see we've got a gap in the blacks on where the highlights are at. So you could, in theory, again, just drag this straight to here. But I think it's too much. It brings it all down a bit too much. I'm just going to bring it, probably only that. Just, yeah, bring that to 7. That looks pretty good. But now, after we've done all those adjustments, if we create a new, just normal levels layer, you can see we've got a little bit to do here. So I'm just going to bring that up. And what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to grab our white dropper. If you click that and hold down Alt while you're over the image, you'll see where whites are getting blown out. And I'm going to drag this even more till I get the photo looking about how I want. And then I'm going to look to see what's getting blown out. So nothing except that window for now. Drag it a little bit more. Robert's face is looking good. Robert's face is not getting blown out. We've got a couple of canisters and then this window, which we're going to fix that window now. I have a feeling I'm going to crop that window out of the finished photo, but just in case, I'm going to fix that. So we're going to make sure the mask is highlighted. We're going to grab a brush, put it at 5% opacity, make sure it's on black, and we're just going to slowly paint over this. The reason why we're using such a low opacity is so that we can paint just this, and anytime we accidentally go over it, you're not really going to notice it. So let's see, we can check how we've done by creating a new levels layer, clicking our white dropper and doing that, and you can see now that window is no longer blown out. Now we can just delete that because that was just a test. So that, in a nutshell, is pretty much the majority of my editing. Everything I do from here on out is going to be just to make the photo look better. The first thing that I do is clone out any distractions. And in order to do that, I just create a new layer. You can do that down here, or you can go up to layer, new, blank, blah, 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 blah. But I like it to be blank, again, for non-destructive purposes. We're going to grab our healing brush tool, make sure it's set to current and below. That's important, because if you're on a blank layer and it's set to current layer, it's not going to do anything. But if it's set to current and below, it will use the other layers as references. So what do we want to get rid of? So over here, I see some gaps in the woodwork from when this workshop was made. They're a bit distracting. We're going to go get rid of those. Increase and decrease the brush size by using the bracket keys. You hold down Alt to grab your point of reference, and then you just paint. And these, because they're in shadow and they're just lines, they're dead easy to get rid of. We just have to make sure that we're not grabbing something strange. There's something down here. Again, I have a feeling I'm going to crop this portion out, but just in case I don't, I want to get rid of them. This stuff here, I don't like. It's catching my eye. What I'm looking for is basically anything that's catching my eye. So little things like that, even though they're tiny, they're catching my eye and taking it away from what I want to see, which is Robert. So I'm going to get rid of whatever that is there. So that's basically what I'm going to do, and this is going to take me a good few minutes, so I'm going to pause the video for a moment, do all my cloning, and then I'll come back and show you what I've done. Okay guys, I'm back. I think I've got pretty much everything. More than likely, I'll see things as I continue on that I'll want to get rid of, but I think I got the majority of stuff cloned out. And you can see what I've done if I just click that. And I'll just click back and forth so you can see the differences. Just little things that I found catching my eye, and I just noticed another one down here. So we're going to get rid of that. Let's put that back on. This bit of wood here, just because it's in the shadows. See, that's the important thing. Because it's in the shadows. Bugger. Right, let me do that again. I hit my arrow key on accident and shifted the whole thing over a little bit. Because it's in the shadow, it's really noticeable. I also, there was a bit of light from his cheek that I just didn't like. The lighting is pretty perfect on him, but because his cheek is funny there, it was catching the light, so I just got rid of that. I think that's pretty much everything. What we're going to do now is sharpen up the photo. So I've got a little action I've created. I have a whole set of retouching actions, which you'll probably be able to buy shortly, and it's not going to be a lot of money at all. These will drastically speed up your editing times. But the one I use all the time is portrait sharpening. It's an action that I created, oh God, gotta be about 2 years ago now. And it saves me so much time. And it's really good because if you do a retouch and it's a headshot, this won't sharpen up the pores. It uses that red mask I talked about earlier, and you can see it's got a mask on here. It won't sharpen up certain detail which can make it look rubbish. And if we zoom in on Robert here, put it at 100%, show you that's it sharpened. I've reduced it to 75% as well. By the way, I always reduce it to 75%. If it's a smaller photo, like if Robert was even smaller in the photo, I would probably reduce it a little bit more. But this is at sharpened, that's it before. And you can see it's not a drastic sharpen, but it just gives everything a bit of crispness to it. So that's that. Then what I'm going to do is I always do this, I'd say about 75% of the time. I do this thing called a gray color. And all this does is it creates a high pass filter, puts it on color overlay, and then I reduce the opacity down to 10 or 20% depending on the photo. This one I'm going to go to 10. And it's not drastic, but it's subtle. And if I click it on and off, you can just see it tones down the reds a little bit. And I like that. It fits with my style. The one thing that is bothering me in this photo, and I don't know what I can do about it, is this hacksaw behind his head. It's really catching my eye a lot, and I'm wondering if I shouldn't get rid of it. This one doesn't bother me too much, but that hacksaw is really bothering me. Let's see if we can get rid of that real quick, because it is bothering me. For something like this, we're going to start off with the clone stamp first, and then we'll adjust it, because we're going to go on to the edges of his hat here and things like that. The healing brush tool is not going to do a really fantastic job for us. So if I use clone stamp, it will do a really good job for us, and then we can worry about fixing any patterns or repetitions once we get the bulk of it done. Like you can see here, we've got some repetitions going on, but we'll sort that out in a second. So then we're just going to get rid of this, zoom in a bit, just make sure this edge is nice. Same with this one here. People messaging me on Facebook. Right. And we've gotten rid of that hacksaw very fast, very easily. You can see we've got a little bit of a repetition going on over here. So we're just going to get rid of it. We're just going to click over here to a spot of wood that's different from that one. And then we're just going to do a quick paint there. And there we go. So we got rid of that hacksaw quite easily. And you know, it's so much better without that hacksaw there. What is this behind? Oh, that's just his hat. Okay. Right. I think this is looking good. Now we need to crop the photo. And I don't normally crop because I shoot a lot for magazines. You'll notice I tend to place things on 1/3, and I don't crop because if this was going in a magazine as a double page spread, this would make a good page. I'll just grab the guide here to show you. This would make a good page, and then you could have all your text over here. If it was really, really a magazine shoot, I probably would have positioned Robert on this side, and then all the text can go on that side. One of my customers, they've got about 5 magazines, and that's how they like them laid out all the time. Subject on the left third, and then on the left half of the photo, and then they can put stuff over here. But this isn't for a magazine. It's just for me and possibly stock. So I'll probably save this as it is. So let me do that real quick. Let's flatten this. Let's save it really quick. We'll just call this, let's see, make a new folder called Farmer. And I tend to name things by the date that I shot it. So this was shot yesterday, which would have been the 26th of January. So 26/01/2017. We'll call it Farmer Robert. And then if there was going to be any customers, I would put customer names and whatnot in there. And we'll call this as well non-cropped because I'm going to crop the next one down. So we'll save that, and then I'm going to hit Command Z to bring up back all my layers because that's just the uncropped version. I want to save that before I crop it because once you crop, you can't really go back. So when I crop, I use a really cool script, and I'll show you the name of it, and you can download it. I'm pretty sure it was free. If it wasn't free, I didn't pay much for it. But it's called Golden Crop. And what this is going to do is I'm going to select all. It's going to put overlays on our photo on different cropping rules. I use this quite a bit because it's quite handy. When I compose, most of these rules should apply anyways, and you can see in the photo where Robert's face is we've got loads of lines crossing his face, which is exactly what we want. What I want though is I don't want this window. I find the window a bit distracting, and that's also why I saved the uncropped version as well, so I can always go back and say, actually, you know what, I don't mind that window, and I'll still have it. But what I want to do is get rid of that window. So first thing I'm going to do is just drag my crop in till that window is gone. Now we can see our cropping is not great at all. This is a Fibonacci spiral, which we kind of want this as close to Robert's face as we can get. So I'm going to, and I don't think we're going to get all the way there though. I'm just going to drag this in. See, right about here though, things start looking pretty good. The Fibonacci spiral is not perfect, but we're not going to really pay too much attention to that on this, I think, because if we zoom in on Robert's face now, we'll let it sort of reset itself. You can see we've got a whole mess of lines crossing right over his face, which means that his face is in a point of interest. So I'm going to hit enter on this, and with this script you have the option to either make a crop mask or just crop it. Since I've already saved the non-cropped version of the photo, I'm just going to crop, and it's just going to crop the photo for me there. Now we've got a new cropped version of our photo, and I think that looks really good. Once we've cropped it though, we can see a couple of distractions on the edges of the photos. Normally I would say, right, I'm not going to get rid of those because I'm going to do a darkening thing in a minute, but this bit here is really bothering me. So I've created a new layer. I'm going to grab my healing brush again, and I'm just going to get rid of this spanner there because it's bright and it was distracting. That looks pretty good. Next thing, I use Nick filters. They're now owned by Google. I think they're either free or they're only like 10 quid now. I got them when they were like 100 and something, which is a shame because I really only use this one. I only use this darken, lighten, center. It's a fantastic little filter that does what it says. It will darken the edges and it will lighten the center, or you can reverse that if you really want to and darken the middle and lighten the edges. I use it to mainly darken the edges. What you can do is you can place the center. So I'm going to click on place center, and I'm going to click on Robert's face because that's what I want the center of the photo to be. I'm going to increase the size of that quite a bit, and I'm going to lower how much it by default goes to 25% brightening of the center, and I think that's too much. So I lowered that down to 11. Look at before, after, before. It's very subtle, but that looks good. And all this does, and I'll show you again when it's done rendering, is it just darkens down the edges a little bit, and it forces your eye to sort of stay in the middle of the photo. Now, I think that looks pretty good. I can't think of anything else to do to the photo. So I think that's it. I hope you guys liked the video. If you liked the video, please give it a big fat thumbs up. If you like it as well, please subscribe. I will be doing these a lot more often. I also put up little quick portfolio videos every week, and I'm going to try to do more editing and little Photoshop tips and simple things that you can get your teeth sunk into. So please subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time.